You're listening to Food Tech Talk, Supply Chain Insights from Farm to Fork, a podcast discussing the latest trends and technology in the food and supplement industries, featuring conversations with regulatory experts, quality and safety champions, and thought leaders across the industry. I'm your host, Lydia Adams. Let's jump right in. Welcome back to another episode of Food Tech Talk. On today's episode, we're delighted to welcome Catherine Cosby, an accomplished food safety and quality professional with over 15 years of experience in the industry. Currently, she serves as the Director of Food Safety and Regulatory Compliance at Kroger, where she ensures the highest standards of food safety across their vast supply chain. Catherine has previously held key roles at Mars, Pet Care US, Walmart, Walgreens, and US Food Service, demonstrating her expertise in risk assessment, regulatory compliance, and continuous improvement. Her dedication to excellence and extensive experience make her a leading voice in the field of food safety and traceability. Welcome to the show, Catherine.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
We're very excited to have you on today. So to start us off, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your journey in the food industry. Obviously, you've worked at some really big names. What really motivated you to specialize in food safety and regulatory compliance, and how did you get to where you are today?
When I think about how I got into food safety, if I'm being honest, completely by accident. When I was in college, I originally wanted to do something with biology. And at the University of Tennessee, was taking a few biology courses, microbiology, and just kind of realized that the large class size of just being a number was not for me. And so I had the opportunity to go and actually tour and meet with some of the advisors on our agriculture campus and started having some conversations about if you like microbiology, then you might like food microbiology. If you like just understanding risk and how to mitigate, you might like HACCP. And so as I started taking some of those classes and just learning more about the program, that's basically how I ended up in food safety. Fast forward, after graduating with my bachelor's and then master's, I had the opportunity to take my first role at US Food Service. Although I wasn't necessarily in food micro as I had originally planned, I really had the opportunity to learn not only just the food safety side of the business, but also quality, also interacting with our supplier base and our pork and poultry categories, as well as frozen entrees. So I really got an opportunity to see quite a bit of the food supply chain and interacting with suppliers, visiting manufacturing facilities, understanding the product specification process to really get an understanding of not just the food safety, but also how do we make sure that we bring the best quality product to our customers and in the distributor space. And so that was my first real foray into food safety. Fast forward, had the opportunity to then work at Walgreens, which was my first foray into retail and working on a private brand space there. Working on our retail food safety programs, especially as Walgreens began to step more into the food space by providing, some of those opportunities and locations that were making fresh foods. And so really had the chance to set some program policy process in partnership with our retail ops teams to set the standard for food safety at Walgreens. Had a great team there, great leader that supported that, and really that focus and shift from being a pharmacy to food safety. Walmart, fast forward, recalls and distribution. So being at Walmart gave me the opportunity as obviously one of the biggest or largest retailers in the country, as well as with an international presence, having the opportunity to really get an understanding of the recall process, the impact that it has not only on retailers, but also the impact that it has on consumers and how best do we reach consumers in that space. And then at the same time as FSMA with sanitary food transportation and preventive controls, how and where that impacts our distribution supply chain. And so had an opportunity to work in that space. Fast forward to pet care, not the likely change, but working with Mars Pet Care gave me a different opportunity to step into a space that I hadn't worked in before. Primarily, obviously, having been in distribution for human food and retail for human food. Stepping into that pet food space was a new eye-opening experience because the food safety requirements are the same. And as we all know, people view their pets as extended family members. They are part of the family. And so being able to ensure the safety of, we call them fur babies, was a new area that I really enjoyed in that space. And, being a pet owner myself. And then this opportunity at Kroger came open, the chance to get back into retail, as well as focus on distribution, as well as fulfillment centers was a no-brainer for me. Stepping into this role, and it's coming up on 3 years for me, has been a tremendous undertaking and an opportunity and experience that has been beyond belief in just gaining knowledge, expertise, and being able to further support Kroger's food safety processes and programs, as well as just overall ensuring the safety of our consumers, which is number one priority. So it's been a journey over the past, I think 19 years now, and I keep coming back to it.
Hearing that story, there's just so many different moves and milestones in your career where it seems like, you were able to build knowledge and learn something different. Like the pet food, just so interesting to me, because then I just feel like it's so holistic what you've done. So today, kind of to dive into our main topic, we are talking about traceability and FSMA 204, and you kind of touched on that in your intro. So let's kick in with FSMA 204 is really a significant regulation in the food industry. I think all of us are learning and experiencing what that means for the future. Can you provide, from your perspective, an overview of what we need to be looking out for FSMA 204 and how that affects traceability for the industry?
Think about FSMA 204. What it all boils down for me is traceability from source of origin through to stores and customers. Having that transparent visibility throughout the supply chain and helping us to understand where products originated from, where they've transitioned through from a manufacturing to distribution and then to a retail store location out to consumers is absolutely key. And so that's one of the primary things that for me, FSMA 204 is really pushing for and is something that I quite honestly think that we as an industry, from a food safety perspective and retail in general, needs to do because that's something that consumers expect. They have for a long time expected that transparency and understanding where their products have come from, the foods that they and their families are consuming, and how can we further support and enable that. So for us, from a Kroger standpoint, that becomes top of mind for us as we work on our compliance towards FSMA 204 and where and how can we provide that information to our customers and consumers that they are looking for to make sure that they have that visibility that they are desiring. And then also it helps to ensure the support from a regulatory, not just a compliance perspective, but regulatory and in aiding if industry has any type of food safety concern with products that are flowing through the supply chain, that enables us to be able to support those processes faster and more efficiently because we'd have visibility to, again, that source of origin through the supply chain to where products have gone. And so I think it's absolutely key for us to make sure that as an industry, we are working towards FSMA 204 compliance and determining the best way for us to be able to do that.
Absolutely. And I think you hit on a couple of points that I think are really important is that if you look at it just as a regulation and compliance and stuff like that, then you're missing a lot of the benefits that come from actually going through the process of being able to trace back your products. And you mentioned efficiency and you mentioned serving your consumers. So I think sometimes it can get lost. And there's all these additional benefits to FSMA 204 and to traceability. Is there anything else that you can think of that's helping you at Kroger as you guys work toward FSMA 204 and complying and all of that is another additional benefit besides just the regulation?
We're absolutely looking at it also from an efficiency standpoint. One of the things that my team is responsible for is recalls. So as we all know, we're holding our breath on Fridays coming up to 5 p.m. I call it the dreaded R word, but compliance to the rule not only, again, helps compliance, but it will absolutely help with recall execution as one example. When we get the systems in place that speak to each other from supplier through to distribution and through to stores, that helps us to better trace product and have the different connectivity points that FSMA 204 is asking for around key data elements and the information that's required for the products. It will absolutely help to speed up our recall process and how we identify where products are, how quickly we can get them off the shelf and prevent consumers from being able to purchase those. Also, on the flip side, when we talk about just efficiency in general, today our associates may have multiple systems that they need to look into. They may need to pull data from a number of different sources. And I think for us and maybe other retailers, sometimes a lot of that may be manual. And so being able to build and work with our technology partners on how we can better support FSMA 204 implementation and traceability implementation will help drive a lot of that efficiency that we're talking about, because that way then we'll have the systems connectivity, the visibility through the full supply chain, and not just having to look here, look there. Oh, let's go check this spreadsheet. So I think that some other things that we think about from a Kroger standpoint is that connectivity from a technology standpoint will help us in supporting efficiency for our business as well as consumers. And then also the other piece would be supporting regulatory. If we get trace back requests because there may be some type of outbreak that has occurred, and how can we support? Because ultimately it's not just a regulatory concern, it becomes an industry concern, because we know that if a trace back request may be impacting a supplier of ours or a supplier of someone else, there may be potential for that to trickle over into how it may impact Kroger. And so just having that visibility from origin, supplier, through the supply chain helps with that traceback investigations. And again, working to get ahead of it to be able to ensure consumer safety.
I agree with that. And something that Kroger has done and really stood out in the industry is what everyone's calling the Kroger letter. You guys basically stated all of the foods need to comply with this, not just the food traceability list foods that are typically associated to FSMA 204. So I'd love to dig into how that came about, what that means for you guys as a company, and how that really affects an evolving industry that is leaning towards full supply chain traceability.
Honestly, it's the right thing to do. We were talking a few minutes ago about what the consumer expects. They don't expect traceability on just a subset of products. They don't expect transparency on just a subset of products. They want to see it on all, quite frankly. And being able to do that, it's the right thing to do. One of the things from a Kroger perspective that we always talk about is obviously our consumers being our number one priority. And from a food safety standpoint, number one priority. And so taking that stance of having an all-inclusive list and not just the FTL, it was an approach that we discussed internally on trying to figure out how do we start there? Because again, it's the expectation of our consumers and it's the right thing to do. And then fast forward, we know how you mentioned landscape is ever changing. And so it's that conversation of we only start with this much and we build the technology and the systems to support it. How nimble will that be later in the future to be able to support this much? And so as we think through the labor of love that it is to get technology built to support compliance, it's also a conversation about how do we enable that ever-changing landscape in the most efficient way possible. And so the flip side to that consumer transparency piece is just, again, efficiency piece. We don't want to have to go back and reconfigure systems again. Say, for example, if the FTL list changes. And so it's kind of serving both purposes of it's the right thing to do, but also it's the most efficient way to manage that evolving landscape and be prepared for future changes.
And I love that view into the future because, as you said, I think it really does combine with the consumer demand. And as the consumer demand increases, it's going to pull this industry forward to where it's going to be beyond individual products. And so I think it's just awesome that you guys there at Kroger have recognized that and had that vision. So it's very exciting. Congratulations on doing that. That's really awesome. So you kind of talked about this a little bit, but obviously you guys have really started this process and there's a lot of interconnecting pieces. So what kind of advice for other companies do you have for best practices for implementing traceability, connecting the technology, all those things that you've discussed, and how do you keep those projects moving and gain success there?
I think from a Kroger standpoint, we've been blessed, if you will say, because the leadership support and commitment that we have to making sure that we're compliant to the rules first, but then also doing the right thing from a food safety standpoint has been phenomenal. It hasn't been just a food safety driven conversation. We have not had to be the project owner. We have not had to be the tactical team. We have not had to be the team pushing the boulder uphill, if you will say, because we've had that leadership support that's necessary from a retail operations standpoint, but also from a supply chain standpoint, from a technology standpoint, because it truly has taken a cross-functional team to make the progress that we have had in moving towards this all-inclusive list, as well as compliance and developing systems. We have been very thankful that it hasn't been a boulder to push uphill, because what we've been able to do is not have to be the expert in building the technology. We've been able to be the food safety expert to help talk through what the requirements of the rule are, what and how that means for compliance for our business and the different connectivity points from a supplier standpoint to a distribution standpoint to a store standpoint, from a labeling standpoint. How do we work with our technology partners to build the connectivity? Because as long as we've been able to give them the requirements, they've been able to take that and run with it to build the technology to support the systems. We haven't had to be the supply chain experts. We've been working with our supply chain partners to understand the implications on what will this do for our manufacturing sites? What will this do for our distribution centers? Just being able to have that cross-functional engagement, I think has been absolutely key, as well as that leadership support and being able to make the progress that we have been able to make. And so if any advice I would have for companies that are working towards this would be to not have this be fully a food safety led initiative, but it should be a cross-functional initiative where it engages all of your business partners across the supply chain so that you can get the most holistic solution that meets the need and not just in a silo.
I think that's really important. And I think that we're starting to see that shift in the industry where it was seemingly, oh, food safety is this department over here. And now we're realizing, like, no, this is across the board. It has to be cross functional. It has to be understood by all the different departments. And, you had mentioned technology. I think that really does play a crucial role within traceability and FSMA 204. How have you guys approached that internally with technology and integrations between your systems in order to really get there with traceability?
That has been a lot of discovery work because our systems have operated a particular way for quite some time. And so, as you know, typically with companies, you've got this system that does this, you've got this system that does that, you've got this system that does this. And where and how do we connect them with the right information to give you the output that you want? Because, sometimes you have all of those systems and you still can't quite get to what you're looking for. You're on those older legacy systems that may have been built just for that particular time. And so I think for us from a Kroger standpoint, it has really come down to understanding the requirements and helping our technology teams to understand them as well, because we've really leaned on them to be able to build the system that we need. When we think about WMS from a warehouse management system standpoint, sometimes distribution is kind of that forgotten stepchild in the middle because we have a tendency, we're just moving boxes. And so as long as we're getting products out on time and in full, we have a tendency to forget that there are other little things around records retention and the length of time, for example, with FSMA 204 and how long things have to be available, the type of data that needs to come out. Those may not have necessarily been built into warehouse management systems in the past. And so just being able to lean on our technology partners to understand what are the current technology limitations today and how we need to move forward with the new requirements moving forward has been a godsend for us, and being able to build that into our process today.
You had mentioned previously having various systems. So how do you guys have that single source of truth of connecting those different places where data lives?
One of the things that we're working on from a traceability standpoint is to build a central system that has collation of all that data in one place. And so one of the things that we're looking into as we're building that system is to make sure that it captures both supplier information, inbound traceability information, as well as outbound traceability is the first thing. We want to make sure that the data enablers that we're focusing on, such as pallet IDs, PTI labels, and Kroger load IDs, all funnel into one source of truth that gives, say, our receivers and or shippers all of the data that they need in that one location. Again, kind of going back to that efficiency conversation, that would allow them to scan one time. All of the information that they need is available after that one scan, and it will capture, parse out the data and translate it into, a predefined format that would help us make sure that we've captured all of those key data elements. And so really building out what that one source of truth looks like from all of those different elements of information.
I feel like we've kind of hit on technology. I'd like to move over to talking about food safety culture. So, obviously this is something that Kroger does really well in order to be able to get everybody, all the different stakeholders that you mentioned on board. How do you promote that culture internally and make sure that it's first in people's minds, the consumer trust and the food safety?
So I think one of the things that we always say, and I hear from my leadership quite a bit, is if it's not safe, it's not food. And as a retailer, that really resonates because we're selling food. And one of the things that I typically like to do when I'm talking to our field teams is make it personal, because I shop at Kroger. My family and my friends shop at Kroger. And so they have to really understand that first, our consumers are what drives the business. If they don't have safe food to purchase, we don't have anything to sell. And then the other piece to that is we don't want Kroger or any of our banners associated with a foodborne illness outbreak. One, because that's catastrophic for consumers and our customer base, but also catastrophic for our brand. And so when you make it personal like that and have those conversations, it really helps them to understand the why behind we do what we do. Because I think sometimes when people think about food safety, they think it's just another process or, oh, it's an add-on to what we do today. It's not. It should be part of our day-to-day, because if we have the time to cook food, part of our process should be to temp that food. And so we're not adding additional steps. It's part of production. It's part of what we do on a day-to-day basis, and just making sure that we sustain that. The first part of the conversation that we have with them. The second part is it's measured. And so we've all heard the saying of if it's measured, it matters. And having the ability to have that support and buy-in, as I mentioned earlier, from a leadership commitment standpoint, in measuring our performance against food safety processes has been absolutely one of the core things that we focus on, because that allows us to really identify those areas that we extremely excel at and those areas that we need to improve upon. And so that's been one of those ways that helps us to make sure that, again, it's part of our culture and part of what we do, because it's part of our performance. It's an expectation that it's part of our performance. And I think third is just rewarding or awarding those that are doing well. Because one of the things we always have a tendency to hone in on is what aren't we doing, or where did this miss come from? What was the root cause? But we don't praise enough those that are doing it. And so I think that's just been the other element of having that as part of our culture. Associates really enjoy when they get recognized for the great work that they're doing from a food safety standpoint. They get recognized for being that steward of food safety. And we say food safety is everyone's responsibility, not just mine or my team's from a food safety standpoint. So I think those are probably the top three things that have really helped to enable and support that food safety culture within the company.
I love the measuring success. I think that's so important. And then in celebrating the wins, definitely sometimes that stuff just gets lost a little bit. So great advice. So just moving over to the industry, obviously you guys are leader in the industry. What type of collaboration is really necessary for us as a whole group to get behind traceability, be able to comply with FSMA 204, but go beyond that and make that key part of our industry? And maybe what does Kroger do to foster these types of collaborations with others?
Collaboration is one thing that I and the company deems absolutely important. one of the things that we can't do is work on these things in a silo, because when you think about the supply chain, it's a trickle-down effect. Whatever's coming from your growers goes to your manufacturers, goes to your distribution centers, goes to your retail stores. Then at some point may need to be communicated to customers. And so if we sat in just along the supply chain and did our own things in a silo, nothing would talk to each other. And so if I just think about the example of how a manufacturer deals with multiple retailers, they'd have a bazillion different ways to have to comply with FSMA 204 requirements. And so how do we make sure that the information that's requested is consistent across the supply chain? Because ultimately what we're looking for and asking for is the same thing. And so how do we streamline that in collaboration with everyone along the supply chain? Other piece that I think about to that is not just manufacturing, retail, distribution. It's also from a regulatory standpoint. So how do we work with regulators to make sure that we have a clear understanding and clarity of what the rule requires? How do we ask for clarification on a piece that may not fully be clear? Because again, what we don't want to do is implement the system based off of what we think it says, as opposed to getting that clarity that's necessary from regulatory. The other piece to regulatory clarity is also making sure that we give them visibility to how our processes work, because each retailer may have processes that may be slightly different. And so how do we make sure that we account for those subtle nuances that enable traceability? For example, if we have products that are transferred from one store to another, does regulatory have visibility to that practice that may happen? Through that practice, sometimes, the outer case is no longer available. And so how do we make sure that we're accounting for those singles through the traceability? And how can we make it such that it's doable for retail in a way that makes it, again, efficient and provides the transparency that's looking for? So I think it's a two-way street on that regulatory piece and that collaboration piece with them as well. And so I think it takes a village or the whole industry to be able to collaborate on these pieces, understand what the areas of opportunity are from each other so that we can come up with the right solution to ultimately meet the consumer safety need that we're trying to get to.
Totally agree with all of that. So lastly, looking into the future, what advancements or innovations within traceability, food safety are you most excited about? And how do you see that changing the industry moving forward over the next couple of decades?
So for me, most excited about, but then also one of the things that keeps me up at night, and it all goes hand in hand, is ultimately just consumer safety. The ability to make sure that we can be and continue to be proactive in identifying risk and being able to be proactive in removing that risk from the consumer space is what I'm most excited about. With FSMA 204 as an example, being able to trace products in the event that there is an issue quickly to prevent consumer safety concerns is definitely one of the pros that I'm most excited about when we think about what the future looks like. Is it comfortable right now in going through this exercise and trying to figure out the who, what, where, and how? Absolutely not. But everything is not always comfortable. But when we come out on the backside of this, I'm definitely excited to see where it takes us as an industry as a whole and how we can continue to further that consumer safety approach, that transparency that they expect, and just visibility to the supply chain and the way that products flow through it.
Thank you so much, Catherine. This has been a great interview. I have learned so much from you, and I know our listeners will as well. So thanks so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Lydia. Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us for another bite-sized nugget of food tech talk, supply chain insights from farm to fork. To learn more about Trustwell and its technology platform that connects product formulation, nutrition analysis, and compliant labeling with traceability, recall readiness, and supply chain transparency, please visit www.trustwell.com. Thanks for listening.